Hello everyone, today we've got a slightly different angle. We're joined on the podcast by Will Veness, who is a founder and of CatchmentAI, a weather platform which is very innovative in predicting the weather for farmers. So we kick off, shall we, Will? We give us a bit of a background to you and the project.
Yeah, sure. I guess to start with, myself, I was an academic before this, so I was at Imperial College London, studying actually topics more to do with droughts and floods and the communication of risk around those. But that finished a couple of years ago, and I think from there I was looking to do something a bit more applied, and this is when I got together with Jack and George, who are much more technically minded than I am. So it's sort of it's one of those combinations where you can have a dream and they can make it happen, you know. But they're actually friends from undergraduate, so we all studied geology together. Actually, totally unrelated subject.
Interesting.
But we've all gone on to do different things, and I think we all hit a stage in our careers where we wanted to try our own startup effectively, and that's when we looked to build on my own research around water and weather, and we identified farming as a particular industry where a lot of the digital transformation hadn't occurred yet, and for myself it's an area I guess I have some understanding of, especially to do with the weather. So we did, I think, what everyone tells you to do, which is to start asking people what their problems are. We interviewed last year probably over 50 farmers, and just did a really deep dive really into what their problems around weather, water, things like that are, and you just ask people their pain points and they'll quite quickly go to the weather in farming. So we were actually, I mean, at some points we were proposing other solutions, to be honest with you. I know probably a bit more academically about compliance and more groundwater and floods and rivers. But every time we had conversations about those things, farms were really steering us towards the weather and saying, I think you guys should take a look at this. I'm not satisfied with the current options I have for weather apps, and I have frequent events where I'm getting caught out by, be it heavy rain, a snap frost, or high winds. You know, people often giving an example that happened in the previous week of a spray. They'd applied it because the weather app said it's all clear, you can go ahead, and then we might have a wash off. We lose all of the chemical. We're worried about where that chemical's gone, but also we've lost crop yield at the same time. So we're having a lot of these cases, and then we started to think about how can we develop a solution for that problem. There's a clear problem, there's a cost. It's clearly something people are generally worrying about in arable farming especially. So that's when we got started and focused on the weather, and we've been basically building the solution for that problem over the last few months. But you know, it takes a while after that to find the solution. So that's where we went next. Yeah.
Now that's really interesting, because I mean, every conversation, like you found yourself, the conversations you have, and virtually all the conversations we've had on this podcast around looking at the long view of farming and what things are affecting, is the thing that always comes back to is something you can't control, which is the weather. You know, we doubt whatever the weather comes. So I guess your application here is to look at something and say, well, we can't control it, but what can we do to best monitor it and use it, I suppose.
Yeah, and going into this, something I knew very well was that you know, there's talk of climate change, and extreme weather is increasingly a problem. We have major droughts and floods, and they cause very large costs on farm. Often there's not much you can do about it sometimes as well. But what we found in these conversations was, when it's not necessarily a disaster, we were finding there's this other type of cost, which is the operational cost more on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis, which is, I'm looking at the weather forecast and I'm not quite sure what's going to happen, and there's costs on both sides of that. Sometimes you would do an expensive spray application, or you'd sow, or You'd harvest your crop, and then extreme conditions would come immediately afterwards. Especially in the case of spraying, if you lose your chemical, it's an expensive moment. So we're seeing costs on this side of unexpected weather following an application. But on the other side as well, when we get a weather forecast that's telling us it's probably going to rain, you get the 30% chance, you get the little cloud, the grey cloud with one drop.
Yeah, I love that cloud where you've got a grey cloud, one drop, and the sun shining out as well, and you think, do you know what, they haven't got a clue what's
it's a hedge. Yeah, they've hedged their bets. Yeah. But if we need it not to rain that afternoon, it's uncertain, and for us that's the other cost, is we're actually delaying a day's work, or if we're a contractor, we're not sending the team to do the work that day because we just weren't sure how bad it was going to be, and that information generally wasn't available on any weather app. The main ones, BBC, Met Office, they're not designed for farming. They're designed for the general public, and they're not giving really the information that you go to the weather app for.
I know there's plenty of farmers I've talked to in the past, and I see the phone is absolutely full of weather apps, and they end up getting to the stage where you just choose the one that looks like you want it to want to believe it. But so what you're effectively doing with Catchment AI then is sort of taking all that information which is out there from all of the weather like you say, weather models that people are producing, and then kind of almost distilling that down and saying, based on that, this is actually what's likely to happen, whether it be the amount of rain or the frost.
Yeah, exactly. So we are not building our own weather model or trying to beat these multi-billion-pound Met Office European providers. There is not a worthwhile adventure unless you're Google to go down that route. But for us, what we've really found is that farmers don't want a prediction of what's going to happen hour by hour. They really want to know what could happen. What are all of the possible outcomes in, say, tomorrow morning? I don't just want a prediction of 0.2 millimeters of rain. I actually want to know what's the worst it could be. Okay, is it 1 millimeter? Fine, I can go out and work. Or is it 10 millimeters? I should be really careful.
Yeah.
And this was the general problem we were seeing. We had one farmer tell us they sprayed a pre-emergence herbicide spray, which I think needs a little bit of rain before you apply it, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters. Sorry, kind of immediately afterwards to help it soak in. But what happened in his case last year was he got over 20 millimeters of rain, and it washed off all of the chemical. And he said, last week, that afternoon, I lost 15,000 pounds, in the snap of a finger. And he said to us, surely there's a way of knowing that could have happened. Because he said, as you said, he had 5 or 6, 7 weather apps all open in the folder.
Yeah.
And he said, not a single one of those told me that something like a 15, 20 millimeter event could happen. That just wasn't on the cards.
It could say it could rain, but what you're saying is it's a case of how bad is that rain? How much is that rain likely to be?
Yeah, and some apps they do predict in millimeters, but they were generally saying it's going to be 4 or 5. And he said, great, that's pre-emergence herbicide, time to go. But what you don't want is that unexpected extreme event. So we started looking for the solution there and saying, well, if there's a range of possible outcomes, how do we actually see what the worst possible outcome could be and the least? And I think naturally at that point you think there's actually hundreds of weather models and simulations going on every hour, and what if you say had 100 and 20 of those simulations behind the forecast went to a very extreme territory, say 20 millimeters? Then our farmer in that case could have gone, you know what, there's a 20% chance I'm going to lose all of that chemical. I'm not doing it. I'm going to wait for another time. And that was the idea behind our solution. And what we discovered at that point is it exists. It's not a prediction style forecast. It's probability forecasting. And this is when we started building Probcast. This is a method that's used in wind energy, finance, trading. Anyone who's making a large investment based on the weather is they're not going off a single prediction. They're trying to look at what could happen, and if there's something that's going to cost me a lot of money. What's the chances it's going to come? And I really want to minimize that risk.
Okay.
So that's the solution, and really we've been working to adapt it to farming.
That's interesting. So the technology, in a way, is kind of there in other industries.
Yeah.
To a degree, and it's just a case of taking that and saying, how does it fit into agriculture, and where could we build that out?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's an established method. I guess one of the challenges is it uses graphs.
Okay.
And they are challenging to process in the first place. It's taken us a lot of months to develop these methods of, taking these forecasts from different places and analysing what the chances are of, heavy rain or frost or high wind, what the things that farmers are really interested in. But secondly, I don't think it's often the most intuitive route to try to offer that to farming. It's a challenging thing to communicate, but it's something that we certainly think is possible, especially now with digital tools, AI. We can integrate, chat functions that actually explain the graphs and make it all a lot easier to understand what's going on and ultimately just get the information that you come for.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, well, sometimes I have a few questions to sort of go through, but this is all a learning curve for me. So I'm just sort of going in and seeing how things go here.
Well, I can ask you. What weather apps do you use?
I'm not a very. Most of the weather apps I use, I tend to look at and think that's probably not going to happen anyway. But in your scenario we're talking about here, I think it is really key what you say, because especially. It comes down to the risk, doesn't it? It comes down to what someone's actually going to... I mean, at the end of the day, like you say, the weather pattern is the weather pattern. And I remember having this conversation, actually, because we sell some irrigation machinery, and I think you probably correct me here because you're much more learned on the point of weather than me. But I think somebody said at one of the conferences we went to about the fact that we're basically getting a similar amount of rain, but it tends to come in sort of blocks now, as opposed to sort of throughout the year, like it kind of maybe traditionally did, and that becomes a challenge, obviously, of how you handle that, because in between times you got droughts and then you suddenly get a load at the same time. But that is something you have no control over. But I suppose the point is saying, well, there's certain times of the year where I've got to apply a chemical, or depending on a crop, it could be that I really don't want a frost, or I do want a frost, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So really, it's taking those scenarios of risk and saying, when am I going to be best off doing that application or whatever it is, based on what I see or what we can predict.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately, you want to minimise the risk that you're going to have one of these major cost moments, be it a washed spray, a damaging frost that you've not anticipated and protected the crop. And at the moment, if you're using predictions that are generally quite hit and miss, your exposure is quite high to that risk, and you're probably not optimizing your operational timing to where you're really minimizing it. And that's no fault really of the farmer. They're often doing a process whereby, similar to us actually, they have 5 or 6 weather apps, and they're trying to look across 6 apps and say, what's the spread of these, which are any of them giving me any sign that it's going to go wrong, and they're trying to find the window that looks best between them.
So really, that's basically what you're achieving here with your with the tool, is to say, tell us how it works and give us a bit of an idea. If I'm a farmer about to use this tool, like what does it do?
So to make the forecast, we analyze all of the possible outcomes, and if say 20% of them are going somewhere you don't want it to, we'll have an alert in the platform. We have graphs that show it as well, but the idea is that we really point people. I like that. Just simplify it rather than having to look at all those graphs. Say, if you don't want rain, don't do it on this day because there's a high probability or whatever. Exactly. for us, we're still quite early. Transparently, we only started building this 6 months ago. So our sort of starting point is to give the data to the farmers and see how they use it and what they actually go for. What are they interested in really seeing? And then we get that feedback, and we work really closely with the farmers that sign up.
Okay.
And for us, we probably have an app that's much easier to use and much more, in your face about what you're coming for, which might be heavy rain or, what is the wind speed, because I need it to be a certain level. But a farmer using the app, how it works, at the moment we've got it sort of free to sign up. Okay. We have farms sign up on a 14-day trial, just generally to get used to the new data, and we try and meet with all of them as well, because we want to understand why they're looking for a solution and make sure we're providing it, but also show them the difference and what to look out for in our forecasts based on their interests. So at the moment it's quite manual. We work closely with early customers, but they've got hour by hour rain, wind, temperature data. We're bringing in more variables. It's 5 day at the moment. It's soon going to be 2 weeks.
Okay.
And the general idea is we want to really assist them with reading the weather and make sure they're working at the right time. So we have the weather itself, but the second part of the platform, we also have the action planner, where after these conversations we understand what conditions they might need to drill, winter wheat or something like that, and they can actually set the thresholds.
Okay.
Because they need a certain combination of wind, temperature, rain, in order to do that. So
ultimately they could set what actions they want to achieve, and then effectively the tool will tell them when the best slot in that 2 week window, whenever to do it.
Exactly. And we do that with traffic lights, sort of systems. So we show there's a calculation there based on what all of those weather variables are doing, what the best time would be, and we tried to simplify that and show red, yellow, green. Tuesday morning's looking good. Avoid Wednesday morning because the wind is too high. Yeah. Avoid Wednesday afternoon because it's raining, and just make it super simple.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because that's exactly like you say. We're not farmers, well, they probably do end up being meteorologists, but that's not really their role. It's actually if you got the information you need that relates to what we're trying to achieve, tie the two things together and say go this particular time to the best of the abilities.
But they're experts. They're doing it every day, and reading conditions, and they're also experts at real time looking up at the sky and thinking, is that going to rain or not? But it's just about, I think, trying to tie into that process they have already of looking at multiple apps and really demonstrating that this is effectively the same thing, but
just simplifying
what we're doing actually is we're taking all of the simulations behind the forecast. The problem with the current approach is if you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weather apps out and you look at what they predict, each one of those predictions is very much in the middle of what all of their models said.
Okay.
So they're taking an average of averages. So the likelihood is if you have some heavy rain lurking somewhere in the sky nearby that could turn your way, if it's not the most likely thing to happen, all 6 of your weather apps will say that's not going to happen.
Yeah. And most people that are using weather app probably deciding whether to go out for the day or whether it's going to be too wet to go to the zoo, not whether it's
umbrella.
Yeah, it's just whether to take an umbrella or not, as opposed to whether you're going to lose a few £1,000 through. Yeah. So for a farmer then signing up to this app, they get this 14-day window, and then basically during that 14 days, you'll pretty much catch up with them, go through with them what they're trying to get out of this.
Yeah.
So this is very much based around what the customer wants to achieve out of it. That's because you're at that stage now. You can almost build it around what the feedback of the customers are.
Yeah, it's designed to be a custom app in a way that they can set their own thresholds as well. So we it's not so hands-on that we build a unique app for everyone. No. And also it's cheaper that way if it's sort of reproducible and after that point, if they want to continue, we generally scale the pricing around about £1 per hectare annual priced, and sort of scale it to farm size, and that's based on studies we've done on return on investment effectively. That's really, I think, how you have to communicate in farming. That's something we've learned being relatively new to the sector. You need to make it abundantly clear how having this additional information in the real world saves money, and we've done studies with some of the farms we're working with to say, actually, we're giving visibility to over 70% of those rain events that you don't currently have visibility over, because we're showing even the unlikely ones, you can work around them. So there's savings there from avoided mistakes and preserved yield, but also you're saving time on the other end as well, when you're actually able to go out and work confidently instead of putting a day off because the weather app said it could not rain and you're not sure how bad it's going to be. So we've sort of got expected savings there. We're partnered with Dyson Farming now and their Tech Innovator program, and we're again just trying to sort of narrow down these benefits and continue to, I guess, get confidence among farmers that this works. It's accurate in that it catches these rain events, but also that it ultimately benefits the crop. It reduces your waste.
That's really the key thing out of it, isn't it? Is giving somebody a tool that will ultimately save them money through reducing the loss of something going wrong, or saving time because they can go out confidently and say, right, I can do this and I know it's right. And interestingly, I was having a chat last week with hasn't come out yet, but we did a video last week with a farms manager at Hunter Pack Produce, grow all the carrots and parsnips and that. And it's one of the things that he was talking about, when we were looking to the future of farming and saying what does it look like, and he'd been in farming for years and said, well, a big thing is what tools can we use, especially with technology where it is now. What little improvements can we use that will just be those marginal gains? Just do the job a little bit better. Because at the minute, margins are tight, things are difficult. Well, if you can make just small improvements that mean that you haven't lost that chemical that cost you a fortune, it can have a big impact across the course of a year, actually. Yeah,
I think so. We're seeing a lot more digital tools. We all share a challenge in that the benefits are quite distributed compared to a new machine where you can very much measure precise yield improvements and return on investment. It's challenging, but you've got to go through the process of really working with farms, running these trials, and actually looking at people's operational logs and say, when did you work? What were the other weather apps showing at that time? What were we showing? And we can also compare when some farms are working with our tool and when they're not. Who's working under the least exposure, and therefore across the year when you're systematically reducing your risk, what's the saving there? That's something we're developing as an adopt trial. It's a proper piece of science, getting all of that data and understanding exactly how much you're saving people. We've got an idea already, but you keep building this and show people that you're saving them on the margins.
That's really interesting. It's like I say, it's all quite new to me to have this conversation, because you've obviously studied this in a lot more detail. And
well, in some ways, yes, but my background's in weather and risk, and generally agriculture is quite new. So there's a lot of times when conversation drifts into something new. There's an acronym, I don't know what it means, and I'm sure on the majority of things we could talk about, you'd know a lot more. But
I just think it's really interesting to get that point of view that from what you've learned, what you've got your qualifications in weather and risk, you're now bringing that into a completely different industry. But the principles can still apply, and you can bring a tool like this that could help somebody save somebody a lot of time and money, because you're saying like you said earlier, you've got industries which are already using these forecast methods, these probability methods, bringing that into farming. And I think that's what we need at the moment, is people to take tools that, you know, maybe are widely used in other industries, or maybe at the moment they're too expensive because only massive industries are using them. But if they can be brought into a simpler situation that actually gives a little bit of an advantage to a farmer, then that's key. And that's kind of, as I said at the beginning, that's what these conversations are all about, because we always talk about the next 5 or 10, 15 years in farming. Now, I'm not going to ask you that because that's a bit unfair.
You could try. You might get a creative response.
But from a weather perspective, So from your learning in weather and risk, if you look ahead, weather's changing, right?
Yeah.
I'm no expert on global warming, whether it's getting better or worse or anything, but weather's changing and likely to change more. Yeah. And go on.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Give us a bit of a rundown of what to expect.
Yeah. I'm not a denier of climate change. I think there's ample evidence that the climate globally is warming, and in the UK it's the same. I don't have the statistics to hand, but you can see that in the last couple of decades especially, we're having a very large proportion of the hottest years we've had. So there's that element, is getting warmer, but and for some crops they might be sort of drifting out of their climate zone and new crops come into feasibility. But I do think the more damaging thing is the more extreme weather we're having. So we've seen droughts and floods in the last few years. It's been a crazy few years of swinging from extreme to extreme. So we've got that on the sort of annual timescale. But what we're also seeing, and part of what we're developing the solution for, is actually week to week.
Yes. Okay.
These predictions seem to be, just not performing to the standard we need. Sometimes the prediction will be for completely dry conditions, and we'll get a heavy event, and we'll say, what on earth? And there's changing weather patterns that the models are struggling to pick up. So we've got volatility, you might call it, and that's only really making the situation more urgent. And farms have often relied on their knowledge of really their microclimate. And
that's true.
We're starting to second guess in some cases the weather behaviors that we've seen over the previous decades. It's not doing the same things.
No.
And that really, I think, has got people searching for other solutions.
Yeah, I think so. And your word there about volatility of it is interesting, because if you're going to have, like last year's summer, and we didn't have rain for however many months, whatever it was, there's nothing you can do about that, whether you know that's happening or don't know that's happening, is there? But on a week-to-week basis, there is changes you can make because of things. So it's bringing it down, like you say, and obviously that's what you're doing, but bringing it down to a 2-week period and saying, what's the optimum time in those 2 weeks?
In terms of we get asked a lot, what are we doing long term? Sort of 3-month forecasts and things like that. And the truth is, it's really hard to predict beyond 30 days. The weather has a butterfly effect, and it can do a lot of unexpected things in a 30-day period. But what you can possibly do when we've got these big droughts and floods is, if we characterize the weather that's happening on farms better, so if we actually keep better records, that might be a weather station, or it might be forecasts which again are risk-based, we can actually start to quantify how affected someone was by drought or by flood, and that brings in other solutions like insurance. Generally, insurance has worked on a damages basis, so an assessor comes around and says, you lost all of your crop, I'm going to pay out. But there's a new type of insurance as well called parametric insurance, which doesn't pay out after an assessment. It pays out while the event is happening.
Okay.
And if your weather station or your forecasts have said maybe you've had this much rain, you've got a flood, It may not always happen,
Yeah.
but you'd get an instant payout.
Yeah. Okay.
And you might be able to use that money to mitigate the loss a
Yeah.
little bit. It's not going to be as big a payout,
No.
but it's instant. And the same with drought. If you've got evidence that your drought has been going on for 2 months, you might be able to take out a parametric insurance policy and say, look, my conditions have been this, instant payout. So I think that's very much in development. It's not something that's widely rolled out yet, but I think there's also hope that we can, with better data, start to really characterize who's impacted and to what extent. And at that point, we can start being quite proactive about making sure that farmers are compensated. But it's a promising solution, but it's
No, I can see
it's one that
it's a big thing.
it needs good data. It needs a build up of data.
And almost that for you, that almost is going to work both ways, isn't it? As in data you give to farmers, but then almost getting that information back then off a farmer and saying, this is what we predicted, this is what you had, and this was what the impact was for you. And then almost combining all that together, so you can actually then start to look ahead and say, with this prediction, this could be the impact.
Yeah.
Because I suppose at the moment you don't really know that, do you? If you know what I mean. Listen, you can
Yeah,
say
something we really, really want to do.
Yeah.
Is, we're applying for an Adopt grant, fingers crossed at the moment, but we really want to quantify our impact, because as soon as we do that, not only do we show to prospective farmers, this is our benefit. You could see it day to day, even if you had that information. But we can also demonstrate to others that might be interested in supporting us and say, this is our impact nationally when farms adopt this practice. And equally with insurers as well, if we actually have evidence of how much farms have been affected by bad weather and the cost of it, it makes things like parametric insurance more feasible going forwards, because you've just got better information on what the weather did and what it's doing now. And there are ways to support people when you have that information. So yeah, we've got lots of ambitious plans.
No, that's really interesting. I think that probably would be, for me, I see that as a really key part of it is having the two sides of it, almost giving you then that end result. Because going right back to what we were talking about at the start, at the moment, a farmer knows what the impact's going to be on what he's doing. Then if you've actually got the data on both sides to say, this was what was predicted, this was the impact, and this was the actual financial impact, you start to build a big picture, which, like you say, could then go into lots of different scenarios rather than just when is it the best time to do it. You can actually look at could it even get down to getting better at what applications people are using and actually saying, well, this is a better time to do this, or hold off on doing this, or don't bother doing this. And it suddenly then starts affecting people's inputs and costs, and I can see it growing into a lot more. So
you're seeing what I see too, which is if we start building up records for people and say, your weather is, maybe you have a microclimate and actually it gets a lot colder in the surrounding area, you can start to suggest things like maybe you should use a different product, maybe you should treat the crop in a different way. Now, we're not agronomists, so we'd have to work with them to develop these things.
But you could tie in as an agronomist, couldn't it? That's the thing. You've got the data.
You want to work with them.
Yeah.
And again, you have tools like AI that can process the weather information and make suggestions. Start conservative and see if they work, and have agronomists say, yeah, that was a good recommendation, that wasn't. You want oversight, absolutely, when you're giving people advice about what to do. But there is the possibility to start having that additional service on top of the weather data, which is getting more and more advisory about when and when not to do certain applications, what applications to do, and even what crops would be best suited to the climate that you experience.
When you find out you've actually got a microclimate that would mean they could have a vineyard, it could be quite
appealing.
different crop to grow. But no, I think it is interesting, and I think even going into some of those different crops, like I say, we obviously majority of what we sell is to arable farmers, but we sell irrigation equipment to salad growers and that sort of thing. And you think, well, when you're talking a crop that's potentially quite expensive, and just being able to have a little bit more confidence that the information you've got is good, or even that this, like you say, this is a worst case scenario.
Yeah.
You can go from there to actually make an informed decision. I think that's brilliant. I think that's what people need. So
yeah, we're trying our best. You mentioned salad growers. The interests are different too.
Yeah.
You get some crops where people are super interested in heavy rain or not, especially when you're spraying chemicals over large areas. But sometimes even salad leaves or fruits are covered, and then the interest shifts to something else. And we're still learning ourselves sort of all of the benefits. We work with a surprising amount of turf growers at the moment who are really interested in very much fine-tuning their irrigation to the rainfall. So we're learning about the applications, and it's quite exciting, I think, when you introduce a new technology to a new space, because there's the sort of the unknown benefits that you didn't even think of. So that's quite fun for us as well.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And like I say, I normally wrap up talking about the long term in farming, and I think you've answered that the whole way through. And the fact that your tool is part of the long term armory for farmers to improve things going forward.
Yes, and I certainly hope so. I think there's a general digital movement in farming at the moment, smart farming. Lots of buzzwords, to be honest, around it. But it's about, when you build a digital tool, really starting with a problem that you're solving. There could be a tendency, not just in farming, but in other industries, of building a big digital platform and telling people to use it. But is it really linked to a cost and a problem to start with that you can grow from? And we're pleased in a way that we've found something that's working now, and you want to sort of expand and keep solving problems that are all related to weather, water, and the environment. And can't solve it all. I think some of these apps that promise they can do everything.
No, I think that is really key.
Maybe they'll get there one day.
Yeah.
But,
no, I think that is really key, what you said at the start about the fact you're working with these, especially the people who are early adopters on this, but and seeing what they can get out of it and what you can do for them. And that's going to make, rather than build a tool that promises the earth and when people try and use it don't get anything, it's better to say we're taking small steps here, this is what you can get out of it, now feed back your information and let's see what we can grow it into. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, very good, thank you.